So yes, I'm going to talk about co-creation, and the line for it really that I want mainly to put through is co-creation for better research. And to me, that would be the main reason why you'd go for co-creation approach, because you develop then better research, better attuned to reality, more sensitive to new developments, to subtle things that happen in reality that you might not pick up if you're not co-creating research. And in this slide, I've got a photo, a graph from a network that I've developed, which is the International Parliament Engagement Network. And I put it in here more as a hint for myself. This is not really about co-creation for research, but it leads to it. And if we have time at the end, if anyone wants to know any more about it, I'll let you know more about it. But in this talk, what I want to cover is, what is it, co-creation? Why would you do it? How would you do it? And then some examples from my practice and some benefits and challenges at the end. And I wasn't sure whether this was a webinar or Zoom seminar. Clearly it's a webinar, so I can't see the participants, but I was going to ask if anyone knew where this photo comes from. If anyone does, then if you could put it in the chat, although I can't see the chat, so I'll forget about that. So this photo is from the Brazilian Congress, and it's just an example of an institution with which I've co-developed a lot of work over the years, and it's an example of the benefits and the challenges that can come through this approach. So what do we mean by co-creation? There's lots of other terms. So you might have seen the terms co-production, you might have seen the term participatory research, you might also see the term citizen science, and they all really refer to the same thing. And it's about research that is developed by us academics, but with non-academic people. So where we're developing the research with people out there in the reality, usually people or institutions or movements, organizations that we are studying as part of our research. This could be public institutions, which is, in my case, it's mainly public institutions, parliaments. It could be civil society organizations, charities, private companies, schools, groups of people, teachers, patients, different types of publics. The area of research of co-creation with patients is actually an area that is very, very developed, and I would say it's the area in co-creation that is most developed. So if any of you are from the health sciences, you might have heard a lot about these practices already. And it often lends itself more for qualitative research, because it's sort of a slower, more in-depth type of process, because you work with specific groups, and that by itself requires time and an approach that requires a qualitative method. However, it also can be done absolutely through quantitative methods, and often citizen science is actually based on quantitative methods, where you have the public collecting, say, data for yourself, for your research, or part of the decision-making process of your research. So it doesn't have to be qualitative or quantitative. It can really be, adapt to whatever makes sense for your research. So the main principle about it, though, and there are lots of nuances and scales. So there are very pure co-creation, where the object of research, the people you are researching, are very much involved right from the beginning, all the way to the actual publication, where you publish articles with your object of research, with the public you've investigated. There's other things in between where you only bring in those publics, those institutions at some stages of your research. And there's lots of different ways of doing it. But the main principle about it is that it's developing research with those publics, with those institutions, rather than on them. So it's trying to understand the object of your research through their perspective also, not just your outsider as a researcher. It's also a lot about delegating power to the research object. And I think this is something that's difficult for us to do, because we are so trained in developing specific research methods, specific research efforts, and there's all sorts of things we do training for, obviously the training for years and years. So how can someone, a member of the public just out there, suddenly make some decisions in your research? And that can be quite difficult. But that delegating the power is basically about collaborating and trying to understand the research through the perspective of those institutions, those people. So why would I say recommend anyone to adopt one of these type of approaches? The main reason really is to develop better research. So I'll give you an example from my own research. So I've done a lot of research over the years, co-produced with parliamentary officials and clerks in parliaments. And one of the reasons why that has led to better research is that it gives me access to an insight which is not public. And although I could go and do interviews of these officials, but actually if I could develop the research with them, I understand better where the challenges are, and I can probe and ask more difficult questions than if I am a complete outsider. So for some context, doing that co-creation process, it just makes you as a researcher more alerted to what's actually happening on the ground. And that really should be one of the main reasons for developing co-creation research, because it's not easy. It is quite challenging in itself, but in my view, it does lead to better research. So it's a research that's more in line with reality. If things change in reality, so whether it's, I don't know, whether you're doing a research on schools, on teachers, and things change day in, day out, you're more aware of what are the challenges that those people might be experiencing. But also research is more relevant, that is more, it's something that actually will lead to practices, to findings that then, say, those schools, those parliaments, whoever they may be, they can apply in their own place of work. And within the UK, at least, there's a very strong agenda of impact. So the impact is about seeing whether your research has an impact in society. And if you adopt this approach, co-creation, you're much more likely to have that chance of impact because you develop a relationship with your research objects and you're much more aware what's going on, they understand much better what you're doing, you're much more likely to influence the way their practice develop, and that will lead to impact. You're also much more likely to be at the forefront of pioneering work. So again, if we think about research cycles, academic research cycles are incredibly slow. So by the time someone has got the grant, then done the research, then a few years later, publish their results, things are very slow in academia, and working directly with people in practice makes you understand much more quickly what's going on in there and makes you identify things that other people might not have identified yet, if you're just relying on reading other people's work. So how would you go about doing co-creation research? Obviously, this slide is just one slide. We could do the whole hour of ways of doing it and we still wouldn't have covered it. On that, actually, I would advise everyone to join a network at university, which is a co-production network, which also has an MS team. And in there, there's seminars, there's other resources all about co-production. And it's mainly led within the Faculty of Social Sciences, but anyone from anywhere at university can join. And there's plenty of examples in there on how to do it. But one of the key things is to start early. You can't think that you do, say you've got your grant and then you go and start doing co-creation. You have to start there, that just as the idea of research starts developing. So if you are developing a grant, it needs very much to be embedded in that grant. In fact, the grant should be already a result of that relationship. You should already be discussing with those people about what are the key priorities, what should be good approaches, etc. And within this type of relationship, it's really important to nurture trust and relationships. So if you are, for instance, working, one example I'm going to show you later is to work with people from marginalized groups, say people from very low economic and social background, and those people don't necessarily, they probably see you as someone in power, someone from the elite. Why would they trust you with their thoughts and what they think about politics? And so in order to do that, you really need to think about how can you nurture those relationships so that those people, whether they're a parliamentary official, whether they're a member of the public, will trust you with what they think. So that needs plenty of time to the startings of building the relationship and then actually doing the research. Very much having active listening is really important. There's absolutely no point to do a co-creation approach to research if you go there and just tell people what they should be doing. You really need to listen to what they think about the research process. And that's absolutely key to the efforts of co-creation. Create safe and trustworthy spaces for communication. So I'll give you two examples. One of them is that International Parliament Engagement Network, which I showed you a photo right in the first slide, where I've created a network which brings together people from Australia all the way to Canada, and parliamentary officials can go in there and talk in a safe place. They know they can share their challenges without being critiqued or ridiculized, say, in public. Coming back to the example of the marginalized groups, in there, one of the key things to do is to work with organizations that they trust. So in that case, the idea is to work with civil society, community organizations that already know these people who are from the marginalized groups, and they're the ones who mediate that trustworthy relationship. And this idea of handing over research power, so making your research objects involved in part of the decisions, say, of shaping the research questions in the first instance, but then also in what methods we adopt, but even in interpreting, analyzing the findings, and even to do some of the research themselves. So one of the projects grants I'm involved with, one of the ideas in there is that we actually can train the publics or marginalized groups in doing interviews themselves. So there's lots of ways of handing over that research power. It is, though, a very long run process. It's not a quick sprint. So it's not something you just fit in here or there. It is something that it's a very different approach to research. So my area of research, and I'll try to go through this really quickly so you have time for questions if anyone has questions. So my area of research is public engagement with parliaments. This involves a little bit of democracy, decision-making processes, petitions, and it's about relationship really between parliament and public. And so my research users, being clerks, parliamentary officials, third sector organisations, civil society, and publics also overall, and parliaments overall, and institutions. So these are the different groups with whom I have co-created research. And so some examples. One example was a knowledge exchange fellowship that I got through the Leeds Social Science Institute, IAA. So IAA is Impact Acceleration Account Grant. And if you are based in the UK, you should be able to apply to those at your institution. At Leeds, I think we have one more round in the current tranche of these grants. And what this allowed me to do was to work with the Petitions Committee for a period of about 6 months. They were just setting up at the time, so I was able to work with them in establishing their new practices, understanding their challenges, and understanding how that could be done more effectively. So I spent a day a week with the team. This is a photo of the team at the time, and that work led to the shaping of the research questions and a step-by-step co-development of the final report that I made with lots of recommendations for the committee, but also through lots of my own findings. Within that, I had lots of observations of private and public meetings, so I used ethnographic methods here and some interviews also. And this led to quite a few outputs, like the report I did for them, the briefing, and then from that work, that was in the UK Parliament, sorry, I forgot to say, then that has led to more work with the Australian Parliament, Portuguese, Scottish, French, and I didn't put the Brazilian there, but so quite a few international parliaments and quite a few public engagement initiatives where I've spoken to people in the public about petitions, and ultimately to 2 articles in peer-reviewed journals, which have been quite important and which have become quite important output. So it just gives you a sense of how this can lead to lots of different things. And it enabled me to understand a system that was just introduced in 2015, which a lot of other research doesn't really capture yet, because the only way to do it would be if you're there at the start of the system. Another couple of examples, I've got a couple of PhDs who have collaborative PhDs grants, which are available from the White Rose network, doctoral training partnership. One of them was with digital engagement, the other one is on children engagement. And what we've done is the PhD students have worked together with respective services in Parliament. So that the one on children is ongoing, is with the education and engagement services in the UK Parliament. And what we're doing in there is understanding how they can do their engagement more effectively. So they're involved in shaping the questions, etc. The one on the right here, this is a grant I've been involved with to understand how people from marginalized groups engage with politics. And in there, it's been absolutely key to work with third sector charities like Mustard Tree in Oldham and the Scottish Community Development Centre in Glasgow to understand better how to work with this group, which is a group that can be vulnerable and can be very difficult to access, and to capture their own perspectives rather than our perspectives as academics. So benefits, this type of approach, contributing towards improving social processes, empowering the research objects, better research, fitting the impact agenda, if that's something that you're interested in. Profile development, it definitely helps to develop your profile and has very long-term benefits in terms of your research. One thing leads to another. And that is very clear as the more you get into it. Lots of challenges though, turnover of staff if you're working with an institution or be it a civil society organisation, whatever it is, staff quite often just move something else, and it's difficult to then find someone to work with and keep those relationships, because relationships and trust is really, really important. Academic cycles are ridiculously slow, and this is really difficult because people in the real world don't work like we do. And there is often suspicion about the quality of research from some areas in academia, and keeping that trust and continuity is really, really difficult, but it's absolutely crucial to keep that, particularly if there's turnover of staff. So that's something that needs to be nurtured all the time, and it's time consuming, there's no doubt. And that's it, thank you. And this is another picture of the Brazilian Congress.